While parking outside my fiancée's apartment, I saw her through the window, on the couch, with her ex. She didn't even bother to close the curtains. But I was so glad to see it. I had parked outside her apartment 100 times before. Usually, it was routine. Leave the car, buzz her phone, she'd come down smiling or wave from the window. But this evening felt different before I even shut off the engine. The light in her living room was bright, curtains wide open. My chest tightened the second I looked up. She was there, clear as day, sitting on the couch. And she wasn't alone. Her ex was next to her, leaning back comfortably, his arms stretched along the top of the couch. They were laughing the way she used to laugh with me. Unguarded, head tilted back, hand resting on his leg like it belonged there. For a moment, I froze in the driver's seat. My knuckles dug into the steering wheel. It was brazen. They hadn't even bothered to close the curtains. Anyone walking by could see them. And in that second, I realized something that surprised even me. I wasn't destroyed. I wasn't even angry in the way I expected. I was glad. Glad because the endless doubts and excuses finally made sense. The late replies, the sudden work overnights, the defensiveness whenever his name came up, all of it was real. And now I had confirmation right in front of me. But glad or not, I wasn't going to sit there like a fool. My body moved before my brain caught up. I threw the door open, slammed it behind me, and marched toward the building entrance. The front door was still propped open from someone bringing groceries in. I slipped inside, climbed the stairs 2 at a time, and in less than a minute, I was outside her apartment. My chest was burning, not from exertion but from everything boiling inside me. I didn't knock. I didn't wait. I pushed the door open with the spare key I still had. The moment the door swung wide, her laugh cut off mid-breath. She jerked her head toward me, eyes wide, lips still curved in a frozen smile. Her ex twisted his neck, looking at me with the kind of smirk men wear when they think they've won something. What the hell is this? My voice came out raw, louder than I planned. She shot up from the couch, stammering, trying to reach me, but I stepped back before her hands touched me. He stayed seated, legs spread out like he owned the place. The silence lasted seconds, but it felt like hours. I had always imagined if something like this happened, I would collapse, beg for an explanation, maybe even cry. Instead, the only thing keeping me steady was the sheer disbelief at their arrogance. "You left your curtains open," I said flatly. "Did you want me to see this?" Her face crumpled, panic flickering across it. She muttered something about it not being what it looked like, but I cut her off, stepping closer. "Not what it looked like. You're on the couch with your ex, holding him like I don't even exist." My voice cracked the air, and then her ex spoke, calm as ever. "I didn't know you were still in the picture," he said, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "She told me she was single." That hit harder than anything. She didn't even deny it. She just turned to him, eyes wild, as if silently begging him to shut up. But the damage was done. Before I could react, a voice came from the doorway behind me. "What's going on here?" It was my friend, the one I was supposed to meet before heading out for the evening. He had pulled up right after me, seen my car parked strangely, and followed me up. His eyes darted between me, her, and the ex, instantly understanding. "Are you serious?" he asked her. "This is how you do him." She shouted his name, tried to tell him to stay out of it, but he stepped in anyway, standing next to me. I hadn't planned for backup, but having someone else there only made the truth heavier. The shouting escalated. She kept insisting it was a mistake, that he was just visiting, but my friend cut her down, pointing out that no visit looks like what we had just walked in on. Her ex, either clueless or deliberately cruel, added fuel by saying he had been seeing her for weeks. My stomach lurched, but instead of collapsing, I felt something steadier than rage, clarity. The noise drew attention. A neighbor from across the hall cracked her door open, peeking out nervously. "Do I need to call security?" she asked. "Go ahead," I said coldly without looking at her. That set off another wave of panic. My fiancé pleaded with the neighbor not to call, swearing it was just a misunderstanding, but the woman had already picked up her phone. Inside the apartment, things spiraled. My friend stepped forward, pointing at the ex. "You think this is funny? You're bragging about sleeping with someone who's engaged." The ex shrugged, but his smugness was wearing thin. He repeated again that he thought she was single. I caught my fiancé's eyes then, and for the first time, I saw the mask slip entirely. There was no charm, no fake smile, just fear. Fear not of losing me, but of being exposed. The knock on the door came fast, heavy. Security had arrived. A uniformed guard stepped inside, arms crossed, looking between all of us. "What's the problem here?" No one spoke at first. The silence was thick, the kind that chokes you. Then my friend said it. "The problem is she's cheating on her fiancé." He caught her red-handed. The guard looked at me, waiting for confirmation. I nodded once. That was it. The guard didn't need the details. He just gestured toward the ex. You. Out. Now. The ex didn't argue. He stood, gave my fiancée one last look, and brushed past us with a muttered curse. When the door slammed shut behind him, the silence was worse than the shouting had been. She was trembling now, trying to reach for me again, but I stepped back. My friend's presence kept me anchored. You should go, the guard said to me. This is going to get louder otherwise. But I wasn't leaving. Not yet. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she had just lost. I turned to her, my voice low but steady. You couldn't even close the curtains. That's how little I mattered to you. Her mouth opened, but no words came. She was empty, caught, stripped of excuses. And in that moment, with the neighbors still peeking through the cracked door, the guard standing stiff, and my friend at my side, I realized something with finality. I wasn't going to let this be hidden. If she had the nerve to humiliate me so openly, then I would drag this out into the light. I didn't yell. I didn't break anything. I just said the one sentence that made her collapse into the couch as if her legs had given out. I'm calling both our families tonight. Her head dropped into her hands. My friend pulled me toward the door, but not before I caught the look on the neighbor's face. She wasn't just curious anymore. She was horrified. And I knew by tomorrow morning, this building would be buzzing with the story. I left without slamming the door. The slam had already happened. It was in her life, not mine. Leaving the apartment that night was not the end, but the ignition. The decision to involve both families had come naturally, almost instinctively. There was no way to keep what had happened behind those walls in the realm of private shame. She had humiliated me in plain view, and her ex had spoken with such casual indifference that it felt like the only fair response was full exposure. On the drive home, my friend sat silent beside me. The weight in the car was heavy, not because I wanted sympathy, but because we both knew that silence would turn into noise soon enough. As soon as we stepped into my apartment, I dialed her parents first. The call was short and cold. I told them what I had seen, what I had walked in on, and how their daughter had admitted nothing while her ex claimed she was single. There was no room for them to wriggle out of the truth. Her father's voice shook with disbelief. Her mother tried to insist I must have misunderstood, but my refusal to bend or soften forced them into confrontation. I demanded that they meet that same evening at my parents' house. They agreed reluctantly, perhaps thinking it could be managed, perhaps imagining they could still protect her. By the time her family arrived, my own parents were already waiting in the living room, seated stiffly as though anticipating a funeral. The tension was thick enough to choke on. When she walked in with her parents flanking her, she looked smaller than she had earlier, stripped of the defiance she had shown in her apartment. She kept her eyes low, shoulders hunched, as though hiding from the judgment pressing in from every corner. The opening was brutal. My father wasted no time, demanding an explanation. He had always been cautious about her, never entirely convinced she deserved my trust. Now, his suspicion carried a sharp edge. Her father attempted to shield her, saying that perhaps I had misinterpreted what I saw. My mother's voice rose in response, pointing out that I had a witness, my friend, who had been there when I entered. The room felt like a court. My friend recounted what he had seen, his voice steady and unforgiving. He left no gaps, no chance for anyone to dismiss the seriousness of the betrayal. Her mother attempted to interrupt, calling it an overreaction, but the momentum was against them. Then came the unexpected intrusion. The ex arrived at the door, uninvited but clearly determined to clear his own name. He said he had been contacted by her earlier in a frenzy, begging him not to speak to anyone. Instead of protecting her, he had decided to set the record straight. When he entered the room, every eye turned toward him. His revelation dropped like a hammer. He explained that he had been seeing her for weeks, maybe longer, and that he had no idea she was engaged. According to him, she had presented herself as single, as someone reconnecting with a past relationship. He admitted to feeling deceived as well, but the cruelty of the situation was that she had lied to both of us, weaving two lives that now collided in this single suffocating room. Her face turned ashen as he spoke. She tried to argue, tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, but her words died in the air. The ex had nothing to gain from exposing her, no reason to fabricate. The chaos rose as families shouted across the divide. Her father accused me of orchestrating the humiliation, as if I had deliberately staged the ex's arrival. My parents pushed back, demanding accountability for the behavior of their daughter. It was raw, bitter, unfiltered. Then came the blow no one expected. Her younger sibling, sitting quietly in the corner until then, suddenly erupted with a confession. With trembling hands and a voice that cracked, they admitted that this was not the first time they had been forced to cover for her. Months earlier, when she claimed she had been staying late at work, the sibling had been instructed to lie to me if I called the house. They had felt pressured, coerced into silence, but now the truth spilled out. The revelation silenced the room more effectively than shouting ever could. Even her parents seemed stunned, unable to defend her any longer. My own family turned to look at me, and I felt both vindicated and hollow. It was no longer just about one night. This had been a pattern, a deception nurtured and concealed for far longer than I had imagined. The tension shifted. It was no longer an argument between two families, but a dismantling of her image, a stripping away of every excuse. She sat pale and trembling, her hands clasped together, eyes darting between faces that no longer offered protection. Her ex left abruptly after delivering his piece, slamming the door behind him with a bitter curse. My friend, who had been silent during the siblings' revelation, leaned back in his chair, shaking his head in disbelief. Her parents attempted one final defense, claiming she was young, confused, that mistakes happen. But the words rang hollow. My father shut it down, declaring firmly that mistakes do not last for months, and lies do not deserve second chances. By the end of the evening, the divide was complete. There was no reconciliation, no plan to move forward. I made it clear that the engagement was broken, that the wedding was finished before it had even begun. I told her parents that the consequences of her actions were now hers alone to carry. She tried to plead as I left, her voice small and desperate, but I didn't turn back. The damage had already been done, and the truth had spread too far to be contained. When I stepped outside, the night air felt sharp and cold, but strangely cleansing. My friend walked beside me without speaking, and for the first time that evening, I felt the relief of knowing I was no longer bound to her deception. Still, the night wasn't over. I had already decided the next step. If she could betray me so openly, then she would be exposed just as openly. The engagement dinner that had been planned for the weekend was no longer a celebration. It would become something far more brutal. Part 2 ended with that decision solidified. The storm had moved from private spaces to family circles, and soon it would explode in public. The days following the confrontation at my parents' house felt strangely calm on the surface, but electric underneath. Every hour, I replayed the scene in my head. Her trembling silence, her siblings' confession, the ex's flat admission, and the furious voices bouncing off the walls. The rupture was complete, but it wasn't enough. A private implosion still left her with room to twist the story, to paint herself as misunderstood or betrayed. I wanted something irreversible, something that would prevent her from hiding behind manipulation. The opportunity was already in place. An engagement dinner had been planned for the weekend, a formal event where both families, friends, and colleagues would gather in a rented hall. Invitations had been sent weeks earlier, catering arranged, decorations scheduled for delivery. Normally, such an event would have been canceled immediately after a breakup, but I decided against it. The gathering would proceed. Instead of celebration, it would serve as her unmasking. In the days leading up to it, I stayed silent. She tried contacting me repeatedly, her messages swinging between apologies, anger, and desperate pleas. I ignored them all. She even appeared at my apartment once, pounding on the door until my neighbor told her to leave. I knew what she feared, not just losing me, but losing face. For her, reputation mattered more than honesty, and that was the weapon I intended to use. When the evening arrived, I dressed carefully, not in mourning, but in quiet defiance. My friend accompanied me, steady as always, ready to witness the storm. As we entered the hall, I saw her across the room. She was pale beneath the makeup, forcing smiles that never reached her eyes. Her parents hovered close, whispering fiercely, while her siblings stood apart, looking conflicted. Guests filled the space, chatting politely, unaware of what was about to happen. Co-workers from her office arrived in small clusters, colleagues from mine as well, along with relatives from both sides. It had all the trappings of a joyful occasion, but I carried the certainty that by the end of the night, the atmosphere would be shattered. The dinner began with the usual pleasantries. People raised glasses, offered congratulations, and commented on the food. I let it continue for a while, watching her fidget and glance nervously in my direction. She knew I was capable of saying something, but she couldn't predict when or how. That uncertainty gnawed at her, and I could see it in the way her hand shook each time she lifted her glass. When the first course ended, I stood. The hall quieted, expecting a speech of gratitude. Instead, I spoke with calm precision, addressing the room as though I were simply explaining facts. I recounted the night outside her apartment, the scene through the window, the confrontation inside. I described the presence of her ex, the statements he had made, and the way she had remained silent. The room grew stiller with each word. Faces shifted from polite smiles to stunned disbelief. Her parents' expressions hardened, her mother clutching at her arm as though to hold her in place. My parents sat rigid, unblinking, their silence a wall of judgment. I continued, layering in the details. I mentioned her sibling's confession, how lies had been covered for her before. The sibling, sitting 2 tables away, looked down, their face red with shame, but not in denial. It was a confirmation more powerful than any words. The shock spread like fire. Guests whispered to one another, heads shaking, eyes darting toward her with accusation. She tried to speak, raising a hand as though to interrupt, but I pressed on, refusing to give her the chance. Then came the next blow. The ex himself had agreed to attend. He walked in midway through my explanation, timing it perfectly, though unplanned on my part. His arrival silenced the last murmur of doubt. He took a seat at the edge of the room, arms crossed, and when eyes turned toward him, he gave a curt nod. It was all the confirmation needed. Her facade cracked visibly. She sat rigid, her forced smile gone, her lips pressed into a thin line. The best friend who had accompanied her leaned away, as though distance might shield them from the fallout. I spoke of trust, of betrayal, of the lies spun so casually. I did not raise my voice. The calm delivery cut deeper than anger ever could. When I finished, the room did not erupt in applause or pity. It sat in heavy silence, broken only by gasps and the scrape of a chair as one of her co-workers stood and walked out, shaking their head. The silence finally cracked when her best friend spoke. She admitted she had warned her months ago, urging her to stop before she destroyed everything. That confession sealed the coffin. It was no longer just my word or the ex's testimony. Even her own closest ally had seen the truth long before and tried to stop her. Her parents looked crushed. Her father's face was gray with humiliation, her mother's eyes blazing with misplaced fury, not at her, but at me, as if I had been cruel in revealing it. Yet even they could not deny the avalanche of proof. The guests began to murmur, conversations sparking in pockets around the hall. Co-workers exchanged glances, some clearly eager to carry the story back to the office. Relatives whispered with wide eyes, already imagining how this disgrace would ripple through family gatherings for years to come. She finally broke, standing abruptly, her chair clattering behind her. Her voice shook as she accused me of orchestrating the entire scene, of taking pleasure in humiliating her. She claimed she had been pressured, misunderstood, even victimized. But the room had already turned against her. No one rushed to comfort her. No one defended her. Her ex rose and walked out, muttering bitterly that he had wasted his time. Her sibling buried their face in their hands. Her best friend stepped away entirely, unwilling to be pulled into the mess any further. She left the hall in tears, her parents hurrying after her. The event ended in chaos, with guests dispersing in hushed clusters, their shock palpable. My parents stayed seated, composed but clearly relieved that I had chosen to expose everything before binding myself to a lifetime with her. As the hall emptied, I stood alone for a moment, absorbing the silence left behind. It was not triumph I felt, nor vengeance. It was clarity. She had gambled with lies, and I had simply revealed the truth. By the time I left the venue, word had already begun to spread. Guests whispered in the parking lot. Phones lit up with messages being sent, stories being relayed. The humiliation was no longer confined to a private circle. It was now public, irreversible, and permanent. That night, I returned home exhausted but strangely at peace. The engagement was destroyed, the mask ripped away, and the consequences had only just begun. The dinner had ended like a building collapsing in slow motion. Guests had walked out in fragments, conversations sparking like embers that would soon turn into wildfire once they left the hall. By the next morning, the story was no longer confined to those who had been there. It had started leaking into every circle connected to her life. The first ripple hit through her family. Her parents had always prided themselves on appearances. They hosted gatherings with polished smiles, boasted about their children's successes, and lived in a neighborhood where gossip traveled faster than weather. The exposure at the dinner was a wound they could not hide. Within 24 hours, relatives were calling them, some out of concern, most out of curiosity. The humiliation was unbearable, and they turned that humiliation inward, lashing out at her. Her father demanded to know why she had risked everything for someone she had already left behind. He spoke of the wedding deposits, the venue fees, the catering costs, all of which had been advanced in their name. When I had canceled the contracts that night after the dinner, I had done so deliberately, ensuring that the responsibility for penalties would land on her side. The organizers had been clear. Cancellations so close to the date carried heavy fees. Her parents, already furious, now realized the financial damage was theirs to bear. Her mother shifted between anger and despair. She alternated between blaming me for being ruthless and blaming her daughter for lying so completely. Yet even in her most venomous words, she could not escape the truth that it was not me who had dragged an ex into her apartment or convinced a sibling to cover lies. The bitterness fractured their household, arguments exploding late into the night, their voices carrying through thin walls until neighbors complained. Her sibling withdrew entirely. After their admission at my parents' house, they became the scapegoat for her fury. She accused them of betrayal, of turning on her in the moment she needed protection. But the sibling had only exposed what was already inevitable, and under the crushing guilt and resentment, they cut themselves off, refusing to answer her calls. The bond that had once been protective had snapped, leaving her isolated even within her own family. Meanwhile, the story spread through her workplace. A handful of co-workers had been present at the dinner, watching the collapse unfold with their own eyes. By Monday morning, whispers had reached the office corridors. Stories rarely travel intact, and in this case, each retelling seemed to grow sharper. What began as a scandal about an ex on the couch became rumors of a double life. Tales of weeks spent juggling relationships, of dishonesty woven into professional spaces. She tried to hold her head high, but the glances and hushed conversations around her became inescapable. A project she had been leading was reassigned quietly. Invitations to lunch dried up. The isolation was subtle but suffocating. Her best friend, the one who had confessed at the dinner to warning her months earlier, severed ties altogether. There was no explanation, no parting words, just silence. For someone who thrived on validation, the absence of her closest ally was devastating. The ex disappeared as quickly as he had arrived. His humiliation had been just as sharp. To discover in front of a room full of strangers that he had been lied to, that he had been cast as the secret lover of someone already engaged, was more than he was willing to endure. He erased her number, blocked her on every platform, and when mutual acquaintances asked, he made it clear he wanted nothing more to do with her. Even her neighbors, who had once greeted her with polite nods in the hall, now looked at her with pity or disdain. The incident with security had already circulated through the building, and when combined with the revelations from the dinner, she became a walking story no one wanted to be part of. I watched it all unfold from a distance, not with cruelty, but with the kind of clarity that comes from seeing someone write their own downfall. I did not interfere. I did not gloat. I simply allowed the consequences to play out. My own family, while supportive, made it clear that they had been right about her from the start. My father in particular seemed almost relieved that the engagement had ended before vows tied me permanently to her chaos. My mother expressed sorrow, not for her, but for me, though I reassured her repeatedly that I felt more free than broken. Financially, the collapse hit hardest on her family. The venue, catering, photography, and travel bookings added up to a sum large enough to sting. They attempted to recover deposits, but contracts were binding. I had deliberately ensured my name was not attached, refusing to co-sign months earlier when something about her eagerness unsettled me. That decision now shielded me from financial ruin. The burden was theirs alone, and with relatives already whispering, it became another layer of humiliation. She attempted, briefly, to reclaim control of the narrative. She told certain friends that I had orchestrated the dinner as a vindictive stunt, that I had exaggerated, that the ex had been bitter and vengeful. But those efforts collapsed quickly when confronted with the sheer number of witnesses who had seen it all unfold. No amount of spin could erase the fact that she had been exposed by her own sibling, her best friend, her ex, and myself in front of dozens of people. By the end of the month, her social life was unrecognizable. Invitations stopped. Mutual acquaintances no longer included her in gatherings. Her parents withdrew support financially and emotionally, tired of carrying the weight of her mistakes. For me, the days that followed were strangely quiet. There was no celebration, no sense of triumph. What I felt was gratitude that the truth had come to light before it could anchor me permanently to her. The image of her through that window, laughing on the couch with her ex, had been the moment of revelation that saved me. I replayed it often, not with pain, but with relief. Life settled into a new rhythm. I canceled the lease we had planned to sign together, closed the joint account she had pressured me to open, and moved forward with my own plans. Friends who had doubted my resolve now saw the firmness in my choices, and those relationships strengthened. The final blow came months later, when I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had left her job. The rumors had grown too loud, the whispers too cutting. Opportunities she once took for granted had evaporated, replaced by skepticism and distrust. Her professional reputation, much like her personal one, had eroded beyond repair. By then, I no longer thought of her with anger. She had written her story herself, line by line, choice by choice. All I had done was refuse to shield her from the consequences. And so the chain of events closed in a way I could never have predicted when I parked outside her apartment that night. I had expected an evening of routine, a smile from the window, a quiet dinner together. Instead, I had been handed the truth in its rawest form. Curtains wide open, no attempt to hide. What could have been years of deception ended in a single glance upward. I was glad I had seen it. Glad not because of the pain it caused, but because of the freedom it gave me. She had been careless enough to leave the curtains open, and in that carelessness, she had spared me a lifetime of regret. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.